On today's show, Sonny Milano and Hendrix Lapierre came out to play as the Capitals pick up a big 5-2 victory over the Bruins.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the Caps pick up a big win in the first game of the preseason, a 5-2 victory. Listen, some people say these games don't have great significance. Tell that to Sonny Milano and Hendrix Lapierre, who are fighting desperately for a roster spot. I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about depth forwards and roster battles. There's not a lot of open holes in the roster when you take a look at it. There's maybe a spot for a forward and maybe a guy on defense. Who is going to be the winner of those roster spots? And then we'll talk about defense and goaltending, but let's dive right into it. The Capitals making a big impact in the preseason. The first game of the preseason in Boston. And I know these don't count, right? They're not in the standings, anything like that. But the Capitals just coming out of the gate ablazing. Sonny Milano, Hendrix Lapierre saying, hey, did you notice me? We're still in the mix here. Sonny Milano, who missed a lion's share of last season, came out ablazing. You take a look at Hendrix Lapierre, that he just doesn't care anymore. He said he's got gray hair coming in. He's just like fighting desperately. He said he doesn't care if he's a center or a wing. He even joked that I'll even play netminder if I have to. That we are seeing the very best out of some of these players that are fighting, like I said, desperately for roster spots. So let's just dive into it here in the first segment here, talking about making a big impact and 2 players in particular. And to be clear here, it wasn't just them alone, but if I have to circle 2 players that really popped off the page, it is Milano and Lapierre. So let's start with the man himself, Sonny Milano. I mean, come on, if you were drawing up the absolute best possible way to start your preseason, this was it. And it's going to be interesting, as I think, like I said, that they don't usually carry a whole lot of extra forwards, usually just 1 extra forward. But Sonny Milano definitely leading, putting his best foot forward, said, hey, yeah, I'm still that guy. This is a guy who hasn't played a game since all the way back on November 6th. Take a look at it. It's, September here, coming up on October, almost a year. Injury, setbacks, all the doubts. And then he walks out there Sunday and absolutely explodes. It's going to be interesting, guys, here. And, I've kind of sketched things out of who's going to fit here and who there. It's going to be tight. And I don't think we're going to have any clear answers until the start of the season, the preseason, the start of the regular season here. There's going to be more games. There's going to be more practices. You're going to see players mixed and match with different lines. Quite an exciting game. And for Sonny, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points in his very first preseason game back. And it was a good thing. And, if you listen to the show, if you're an everydayer, I always say that I don't like to pick favorites. I like the best players possible. Well, I got both of those. I entered my own personal human element in here that I'm kind of pulling for Sonny. He talked about that he had to, watch most of the games up on high, up in the press box. And it was hard not knowing when he was going to be able to be back in the mix. To make this big impression right out of the gate was huge. And that first goal, just vintage Milano. Quick hands, a nifty little backhand to beat the goalie. And it was the goal that, Joe Beninati was talking, and he didn't even realize it. No one realized it at first, except for Sonny, that it kind of hit up and kind of knocked behind the water bottle there a little bit. But A nice goal just right out of the gate. And you could tell right away he was feeling it. He was exuding confidence. And I've talked about that quite often on this show, is leading, smiling from inside, as they say. You saw that with Mantha when he was here. The last season he was here, you saw Ovechkin just really excel. That once you start scoring goals, once you have confidence in the skill set, you're darn near untouchable. And that was the case. And then he forces a turnover, finds Lapierre, boom, another one. And right away, I'm like, this is going to be a fun game. And, it's kind of telling of what kind of team Boston might have this season. And I know it wasn't all their veterans in there, but not good. And before the period is even over, Milano sneaks in behind the defense and goes bar down. If you're watching it at home, maybe a lot like me, pumping your fist like, yes, this is what we were hoping for. And to be clear here, I didn't know he was going to be this good, but when you saw him in camp, you're like, wow, this is like the best version of Sonny Milano we have seen in quite some time. The goal, bar down, just filthy. Now it's not just scoring. That's the thing. He looked fast. He looked creative. He looked engaged defensively. He checked a lot of the boxes I think that Spencer Carberry had in his head. Like, is Sonny Milano going to do this, this, and that? I think he checked all the boxes there. Protecting the puck, playing with confidence. Honestly, it didn't look like a guy shaking off any rust at all. To me, it looked like a guy who's been waiting a year to prove something, and he did that. After the game, I think that Sonny just had to be feeling absolutely confident, like, yes, mission accomplished. I knew I was that guy. The tough thing when you watch the game, that, he just kind of fist pumped the guys, but inside he had to be feeling like, oh my God, this is so great. But played it low key, right? But, and you know what? If this is the version of Sonny Milano that shows up consistently, he's not just going to make the roster. He's going to force the way into a top 9 role. I really do believe it. A little bit later, I'll talk about possible line combos that I can see shaking out here. That's how good he looked. And then Hendrix Lapierre, the guy that is a young man, said he's got gray hair coming in, just frazzled. We know that he was on the Capitals last year, slated to be that third line center. And just didn't really find his groove. He found it down in Hershey, but he made it quite clear that he wants to make this the season that he sticks on the big team. This was the first time back in a Cap sweater in a long time. If you remember, his last NHL game was back in December before he got sent to Hershey, and he knew this preseason is going to be big for him. And again, another guy that checked the boxes that needed to be checked, a shootout goal as well. This was a really great version of Hendrix Lapierre. And he wants to stick around. He wants to be a guy in the lineup, and he did the right things. I don't think he could have done any more. I know that the roster's tight. At the end of the day, you just got to play your best and let the balls and let it see where it all shakes out, right? I think that he led with a strong foot, and he delivered tonight. 3-point night, a goal, 2 helpers. That slick feed off the Chesley goal. Even picked up the shootout winner when it was all said and done. But here's the part that I loved. It wasn't just the offense that we saw there. He showed some grit. This is a different Hendrix Lapierre. He's playing like he's ticked off, is what I'm going to say for this podcast. He got into puck battles, took a puck up high, left the ice bleeding. If you didn't watch the game, got stitched up, and then came right back out angry and wanting to impress. And he did just that. And that's the kind of stuff that Carberry's going to notice, that he was just put me back in, brush it off, and kept playing. And then he jumps in on a 3-on-1, threads a pass to Chesley, tap in, just textbook. He executed everything perfect. He looked faster, stronger, more decisive. And you can tell he wants this shot. That, it didn't work last season, but that was last season. Put the past in the past. So that's the thing. Between Milano and Lapierre, you couldn't ask for more from 2 guys that are fighting for an opportunity. And like I talked about earlier, in this first segment here, early, really, guesses of something that could be really great. If you take a look at line combos, Milano, Lapierre, Beauvillier. I think that could very well be the third line for the Capitals. Now, again, I'm getting way ahead of myself. This is the only first preseason game. That's if Connor McMichael, for some reason, doesn't work out at the center position. Say they just like him at the left, the second line left wing. That I would be pretty good if they could sustain that, and we could see more of that. A Milano, Lapierre, Beauvillier line could be quite stunning. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about depth, forwards, and roster battles straight ahead. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. You can identify that you aren't saving as much as you thought. I was able to see where I was spending money wisely and where I could use some work. And also, if you have a significant other in your life, you can help plan your financial future together. I know you're going to love it. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about that there's not a lot of roster spots that are going to be available. It is going to be very tough. And, well, some players really stepped up and are going to make it difficult for Spencer Carberry and his staff. In the first segment, I talked about Milano and Lapierre. Oh, but there's more. Let's dive into that in the second segment of the show. Ivan Miroshnichenko and Bogdan Trineyev. Two players that, if they're not on your radar already for young Capitals prospects, they should be. Ivan Miroshnichenko is a guy that, Spencer Carberry said that he wanted to see more from him. And as we take a look at the production in the game, on the night, he had an assist, a point, and one shot on goal. And it wasn't just, what you saw on the box score. He chipped in other ways as well. But like I said, it's not going to be an easy thing for any of these guys to sneak in there. But as far as Ivan Miroshnichenko and Bogdan Trineyev are concerned, those two worked really well together. And, it's going to be interesting to see, is that going to work well in Washington, or is that going to work really well in Hershey? The thing of it is, Miro forcing a turnover finds Trineyev up front goal. So that's the thing there that, Miro was hoping to find the back of the net, but getting involved in the scoring there as well. Those are big things to notice. And beyond that one play, they were noticeable, that group together. Miro was physical. He's fast. He's not shy about shooting. He did take that high stick, but he shook it off and came back in and looked like, it didn't really bother him too much. So that was the line of Miroshnichenko, Rabinski, and Trineyev. And, these are going to be exciting lines and combos. And, even if it's not this season, well, what do we know? That, Ovi's in the last year of his contract, and who knows where that is ultimately going to go. That if it doesn't work this season, what do we see? If you see those kind of line combos down in Hershey, take notes there, and definitely things to build on. And, encouraging, I guess, is what I'm going to say about what we saw with their production tonight. So, like I say, Miro is that guy, a big guy out there, and led with a physical front there. That was huge. And he's fast. He's not shy about shooting. And that's big. Trineyev, now listen, this is a kid who's fighting to prove that he belongs as well. And he showed a lot of what the Capitals want. And like I say, I talk about that on the show, as a lot of it is about just mental check boxes for the coaching staff. He gets to the net, plays a strong two-way game, works hard on the back check, and sacrifices the body. That's what I'm saying, that there is no clear winners. It's just in this particular game tonight, it was pretty much all standouts. There was very few things that I noticed in the game like, wow, that was a glaring deficiency. But the thing about him, he's not flashy. He is effective, however, and I think that is where he's really stood out. And then you have a guy that's making it interesting as well. 18 years old, Lyndon Lakovich. Yes, Lakovich. It's not Lakovic. That is what he said that he wants to be called. And we've been hearing a lot about this kid early in camp. And, impressive. Plays with swagger. That is something that is thrown around quite a bit. Confidence. And that's not a negative thing. You see that from Ryan Leonard as well, is that when these guys are feeling it, I think that's when they're really engaged. So what we saw in practice and what we saw in the game was huge. Big frame, skates well, plays with some bite. And in his first NHL preseason game, he looked like he fit the part. Sometimes that's half the battle, right? Is that standing out like you're just a boy standing amongst men. That wasn't the case. He looked like he fit in. I see him playing for Moose Jaw again, just based on, like I said, the crowded roster. But I think there is a distinct possibility that he could be good to go for the Capitals next season, depending on his development in the coming season. But what we saw in the game from Lakovich is he was moving his feet, generating chances, and using his size. There was an interview in the game between Tarek El-Bashir and Lyndon Lakovich, and he was talking about, Tarek was talking about that he could grow into his frame, and he said, of course I can. And I think that he could be a real force to be reckoned with. That the first time that Lyndon Lakovich met Tom Wilson said, wow, you're a big boy. And he goes, look who's talking. So this is going to be a big team when you take a look at it with the Protis brothers and Pierre-Luc Dubois, Wilson, Leonard, these guys. It is going to be a huge, huge team. And those are all things, size is one of the things that's, when I mention a prototypical Capitals player, that's it. But as far as Lakovich is concerned, got a breakaway bid in the third. Didn't finish. It was close. It was one of those moments like, is he going to get his first goal here? Shot it wide, but the fact that he was in that position, that matters. He played just under 14 minutes in this game, but I think made a big impression. And for a guy making an impression for the first time at this level, it was a good showing. Again, it would have been good if he found the back of the net, but, getting in a good scoring opportunity, I think, was another positive check for him. And one more quick note, Anthony Beauvillier as well, quietly finished a +3. A guy that was spoke of by Spencer Carberry as a Swiss Army knife. The only player that the Capitals acquired at the trade deadline who can play flawlessly up and down the lineup. Like I spoke about earlier in the show, I think there's a real good possibility that you take a look at the third line that we saw, or excuse me, it wasn't the third line, Miroshnichenko or Milano, Lapierre, Beauvillier, the second line in this afternoon's game could definitely be a good option as a third line going into the regular season. Again, a really early take on it here, but very encouraging nonetheless. He helped drive play and just kind of picking up where he left off last year. A guy that spent some time playing with Alex Ovechkin, a guy that played with Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, that the guy fits in. And ultimately exactly what you want from a veteran guy trying to carve out a role on this team. So overall, forward depth looked good. A lot of guys made their cases to join this team. And, you take a look at it, there was not a ton of veterans on the ice today, but the young guys, that's what it was all about. And, maybe not guys that or the newest guys. But I'm talking about Miro. I'm talking about Lapierre. And those are the guys that are really looking to stand out. And Sonny Milano as well. I know that he's not, in the prospect range anymore, but a guy that was out of the mix last season, just to have a really strong showing. The forwards looked really, really good in this first preseason game. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about defense and goaltending. Some good things to notice there, as well as the net minding really came out to play. I'll discuss straight ahead. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to play. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live action as it unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping your eye on your fantasy lineup. And say the Commanders are playing or the Ravens are playing. Well, you've already got vested interest in the game, but say you want interest in all of the games, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays if you need it. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment here, we're talking about defense and goaltending. And like I said, it was a really great showing by the offense and also the defense. I know that oftentimes the goal scorers, the great assists, those are the kind of things that get noticed the most. But be clear here, the defense and the net minding came out to play here as well. So let's talk about that in the final segment here. And we got a real first opportunity to see Declan Chisholm in a Capitals jersey, and he was steady. Played just over 20 minutes on the top pair with Trevor Van Riemsdyk. And where does he fit in? Well, he is going to be the guy that fills the void that Alex Alexeyev left behind. And, it's just kind of understanding your role within the team. He is going to be the extra defenseman. In that mix could also be Dylan McIlrath. And but the thing that we know is it might be a role that's called upon more than it was last year, that the Capitals blue line big picture was pretty healthy until the latter part of the season when Marty Faravari got injured. We saw games missed here and there with Roy and these kind of guys, Chikrin. But all things considered, I would say that the blue line big picture was pretty healthy. We don't know what this season is going to hold. And what I saw in a small sample size from Declan Chisholm was encouraging. What are some of the things we noticed? He moved the puck well, skated well, and didn't look overwhelmed, as there is a tremendous amount of younger talent. Some talent that has, experience at the junior level, some that has experience at the American League level. When you take a look at Declan Chisholm, that he has some NHL experience, and that bodes well for him. He didn't look overwhelmed by the situation, and I think ultimately why the Capitals acquired him. As we remember back Alexeyev, there was a lot of hope there, but he never lived up to expectation, or he didn't last season anyway. But that's what you wanted to see from him. I think that a guy adjusting to the new system, he looked really, really good. But on defense, the standout, a guy that has been in the organization for some time, I think that just waiting for his opportunity. And we got some defenders going into contract years. I'm talking John Carlson. I'm talking Trevor Van Riemsdyk, that it's going to be the guys like Vincent Iorio that could definitely pick up the torch when they move on to their next mission there. This guy led the team in ice time with 21 minutes. And when I was talking like John Carlson, a guy that plays 20, 25 plus minutes a night, a guy like Vinny Iorio that could play 21 quality minutes, that's huge. First guy over the boards on the penalty kill, physical, throwing his weight around. And got, involved in some pushing and shoving, that there were some Bruins players that were trying to take advantage of some of the younger Capitals players. And Vincent Iorio, if he was on the ice, would skate in there and go, no, you're going to have to answer to me. You stay away from the younger guy out there. You're going to answer to me. He was the sheriff when he was out on the ice, mixing it up in net front scrums, moving the puck out of danger. Again, a guy that I think is just on the verge of being NHL ready. Very well could be NHL ready, but I think that he's the kind of guy that I wouldn't want to see him as an extra. If there's not a spot for him on the big team, I want to see him continue to grow his game, getting quality minutes down in Hershey. He looked like a guy who he could prove he could take on more NHL responsibility potentially this season. And another guy that really popped off the page is Ryan Chesley, a guy that played for the University of Minnesota last year, jumped right into the play, scored a really nice goal off the rush. And one of the things that they wanted to see out of Chesley was more offensive production. And for a young defenseman trying to climb the ladder, that's exactly what you want to see. You want to see more offense? Okay, how about I score a goal in the first preseason game? And then you got Leon Mugli, over 20 minutes, joined the rush, played with confidence. Another young piece showing that he belongs. And that's one of the common themes here in this episode is a lot of young talent that's just brewing. I think that Hershey is going to be some really fun hockey to watch this year. But the biggest standout, the surprise for me, I guess surprise is what I'm going to say, is Garen Bjorklund. We know that Logan Thompson started the game, but Garen Bjorklund was absolutely lights out. Am I saying that there is going to be a battle in net for the number one in Hershey between Clay Stevenson and Garen Bjorklund? Yeah, it very well could be the case. It might be a 1A, 1B situation, similar to what they have in Washington. Now, listen, Logan Thompson started, stopping 14 of 16, did his job. It kind of what you expect out of Logan Thompson, but Bjorklund, he came in and slammed the door in the Bruins' face. 12 shots, 12 saves. What you got for me now? How you like me, as Kirk Cousins would say. That is what I think that Garen Bjorklund could say, as he was flawless. And if you need further proof, and then in the post-game shootout practice, 5-4-5. So a guy that was looking to make an impression on a goalie pipeline that's rather full, but the knock, for the goaltenders in the pipeline is how many of them are NHL ready. That Hunter Shepard has moved on to the next one for the Ottawa Senators here, that he was the number one, and Clay Stevenson is the number two. But I'm going to go ahead here and say that he really stood out and I think made quite an impression. This is a kid who battled through injuries, had back surgery a few years ago, and now he's healthy and hungry, and he looked sharp. Lateral movements, tracking pucks, calm the net, check, check, check. Definitely a name to circle and bookmark in your brain hey, if there is an injury, it does seem apparent that Clay Stevenson is the first guy called up. But if he continues down this path, he could make it very interesting. Like I said, he's likely going to be playing in Hershey this season. Expect to see a Clay Stevenson at Garen Bjorklund tandem. But with performances like this, that is how you climb the ladder. And that's what the organization wants to see. As I know that, Logan Thompson is locked up for the long term, and Charlie Lindgren signed that 3-year deal as well. So it doesn't seem like a clear path. But what are some of the things that we know? You can't plan for the unplanned. Say a netminder, they decide that they're not what they hope for. Say Charlie Lindgren, who had kind of more of a bumpy ride last season than we had seen from him historically. We don't know. But what I am going to say is that in this first preseason game, a lot of players really rose to the challenge. Milano, Lapierre, Miro, Chesley, Bjorklund, It was a fun game to watch. Building blocks. Exciting to see how this all unfolds. The next game, of course, is on Thursday at Giants Center against the Flyers. Definitely a game to watch as well. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL as they have you covered 5 days a week. Available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.